them along to Andrew and Susan. So please continue to feel free to share that information and feedback, and we want to make this as interactive and as helpful to you as possible. So now, without any further ado, I'm going to turn our second webinar over to our Worship Times leaders, and see you at the end of the meeting.
All right, good morning, everyone. For those of you that weren't here last week and maybe had a chance to watch the video, my name is Andrew Yeager-Buckley, and I serve on staff with Worship Times. And in that role, I'm a director of operations, kind of managing the kind of overall projects that come in, supporting churches with their website redevelopments or some of their communication needs. One of the unique things I think about the guidance and counsel I can bring to this conversation is my role as an elder at Central Presbyterian Church in Louisville, where since March, I went from being part of a tech team that just ran the soundboard to learning how to produce an online worship service, which is what brings us to these conversations over these weeks. I had a pretty good experience with using various video conferencing platforms, but not for creating a worship experience. And so, there are some things I showed up with some experience, and some other things I had to learn as well. And so, some of these parts of these presentations are some of those learnings that I've learned, but also have learned from others along the way. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides so we can get started. And of course, the first button I hit blocked my whole screen with your beautiful faces. So let me just adjust one other thing, and then we can go. All right, so the webinar today is really going to examine best practices around producing a digital worship experience. I'll be offering some thoughts on how to create a consistent workflow with organizational tips for managing the digital production process, and then also just how to work with digital content that you plan on sharing as part of your service. We'll end our time with a collection of tips, tricks, best practices related to your audio and video setup, and how to ensure the very best possible quality. Successful and sustainable digital worship really involves a team. Church production teams are pretty underrated. I'm talking about those faithful volunteers that staff and run your sound. If you have a church that has some light kits, lighting, cameras, when they do their job, when we do our jobs well, nobody really notices. But when things go sideways, everyone notices, and you get that lovely, everyone looks back to the corner. And so it's a really critical element to this whole planning process. A strong production team is the key to having a smooth and compelling worship experience. Some church leaders question whether it's theologically appropriate to care about high quality production value in church. The word production sounds commercial, but the origin of the word comes from the Latin word producere. And right now I feel like Mrs. Borg, my middle school Latin teacher, would be so proud that I, at least at one point in my adult life, drew from my Latin classes. But producere, that root word, means to bring forth. And in our worship services, we should be bringing forth our best to worship. God has gifted us with light and sound, and when we worship, we also want to bring forth the message of the gospel in a clear and compelling way, and not a distracting way, as much as possible. Building a strong production team helps you bring forth the gospel message to your community of faith, whether it's in person, online, or a little bit of both. All too often, the conversations around producing digital worship immediately goes to cameras, microphones, and streaming platforms. It's natural to want to go there first. But what really needs to be discussed first is how you're managing the plan, or really just planning in general. It's really critical to, let me just go ahead and, it's really critical to establish a consistent workflow for all leaders involved in the worship planning process. Schedule a weekly worship planning meeting. Now, this is the time when your worship planning team meets to review the previous Sunday service and finalizes their plan for upcoming Sunday. I know this sounds obvious. Andrew, of course we plan worship. Of course we have worship planning meetings. But I know that not all churches have this rhythm of actually reviewing each week. Everyone might have their pieces of the liturgy that they're in charge of preparing. And so some of that might, you might meet monthly or quarterly to do really a face-to-face debrief, and then kind of using email to kind of fill in the pieces throughout. But taking that time to really actually review each week, specifically, especially because of digital worship, I find it to be really important. As part of that planning of the service, decisions need to be made on any supporting media, slides, videos, audio that need to either be created or gathered for the service. And it's important that this initial meeting occurs early in the week, because with digital worship, there's more prep work that needs to happen, especially for those of you that record your services in advance. There's much less wiggle room to be able to pull those items together at the 11th hour. Not that I'm encouraging our live worship friends to wait till the last second, because that allows for more flexibility. But all of those elements take time. Invitations to your volunteer or even staff, anyone who's going to be participating as a worship leader, really need to go out as soon as possible. Anyone that will be serving in a leadership capacity during that next week's service, if a family is being invited to lead any type of opening, gathering ritual, such as a lighting of the Christ candle, or the scripture reading is going to include multiple readers, those invitations need to go out as soon as possible so that they can be confirmed before the final tech rehearsal, and I'll say more about that in a bit. And the technical director, whoever's coordinating the actual, whether it's recording or live, that they can have who those individuals are confirmed, and how many people. That really needs to be confirmed in advance, because it's much more complicated, obviously, especially for live, than just at the last second, if somebody doesn't show up, you can tap a different person to be a reader. The implications of those people changing, or if it being going from one person to 3 readers at the same time, it's not that it can't happen, it just needs to be communicated in advance. So the next item I want to just kind of offer some thoughts on is any pre-recorded music or videos that are going to be played as part of the service. You really need to set some hard deadlines for when that content needs to be submitted to the technical director. It should at the very least be before the final rehearsal so that it can be tested and worship leadership can verify that it's what they want or expected. That is so important. Just because I say, I've got the file, yeah, I can see that it was synced to me through the Dropbox folder or Google Drive, and it may play fine, but it may not be what Pastor Mark or Ann was really expecting it to be. And so it's really critical that everyone has eyes or hears exactly what's been prepared, and then they can know what to expect, or what to not expect. Okay, that's not going to work. Let's not use that. Andrew, remove that from the tech notes. We're not going to go ahead with that. And those are the things that can only really be caught during that kind of walkthrough. And that brings me to pretty much, I've now hinted at a couple times this tech rehearsal, but having a weekly worship production meeting or tech check or tech rehearsal, whatever you want to call it, this is a great time, an important time to invite all of your leaders, digital greeters, anyone that's playing a role in the service, or as many as possible, to be part of a full walkthrough. This is important whether your service is pre-recorded or live. You should have a dedicated time with all of the leadership and members of that team to walk through the different elements of the service, verifying all the transition points, making sure that content has been received. These are often the moments when walking through that full service, when and with all the audio and video, that our team at Central has figured out that certain elements just can't be back to back. In the planning process, it might have made complete sense that this moment would flow directly into this moment, but then as we actually use those media pieces or attempt to switch screens, it's obvious that it's going to be a distraction. It's going to take away from the purpose of that moment, that time, that tool. And so we change the order, or we come up with a different plan, or we figure out that a particular slide is just unnecessary. To just have a visual sometimes is actually more distracting than helpful. And so those are those moments that we're able to catch as well. So another element that I'm going to want to talk about is creating a good, and I've kind of referenced this before, but creating a good and solid script with detailed tech notes. Most churches already, already have a history or experience in creating a different version of your church bulletin that's created for your worship leaders. It often includes all the prayers being used, particular cues or prompts as to when maybe your liturgist needs to be encouraged or reminded to begin a certain element of the service. What's needed for digital worship is all of that information with the inclusion of technical notes and technical cues. So this includes every transition, whose microphones need to be muted or unmuted at any given moment, what slide should be showing, how many seconds after a particular prayer and maybe a time of silence should a particular song start being played. Everything. You can never include enough information. It's a document that should be distributed to everyone playing a role in that particular service. And our team has had a really good experience of sharing that document through Google Docs. And then during our tech rehearsal, we're all able to view it together live and make edits to it live. This is such an important tool, and it kind of goes back to, there's a couple different moments I feel like last week where we spoke about this, but it's also about by having that information shared fully, it also is it is a built-in backup plan so that anyone else on the team, no one person is holding on to that, I hate to call it, it's not the Bible, but that document that holds so much important information, so that if another leader needed to step in at the last moment, they would have all of that raw notes and data at their disposal. So I want to take a kind of a breath here and I don't want to pepper you with too much too fast, but I would love to hear what are some of the ways that your team has worked to manage or plan or organize as you've transitioned to this digital worship element. And I would love, let me go ahead and actually stop screen share so that we can kind of see some faces. But if you want to just, put something into the chat, if you'd rather not speak, but I would love if you want to raise your hand. I'd love to hear from in your own words, maybe some of the tips that you have kind of come up with, what's worked for your team. And now that I've got everyone's faces up, it's good to see so many familiar faces. Don't be scared. This is not, this is a judgment-free zone.
Okay, here. Oh, I'm gonna talk.
Great. Susan.
When I put the service together, I just write down where I will be so that we can set up the camera angles. And our team is me, the accompanist, and the man with the camera. That is our team.
Yeah.
So, and the time we did it, I just assumed it would be worship where he would move the camera each time. And about the fourth time, we figured out, okay, everything that happens at the communion table should be filmed, should be recorded at the same time. And then George can edit it and put it together, which led to some hilarious continuity errors with the Easter lilies, as we removed the brown ones during the service, you know, between takes, not knowing they were brown. But despite the continuity errors, it made it a lot easier and faster to film, and we could control the lighting much better.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I kind of would love to go back and see that. I'm sure all of a sudden there was a flower and then all of a sudden it was gone, or then it appeared. And anyone else? Oh, Shelley?
Yep.
Go ahead, please.
Andrew, as you know, at our service at Central, besides planning everything, we have what we've called digital greeters. And I think that's helped as people are getting connected into the service. We enable the waiting room. And so we have someone that sort of manages that and oversees it. If we get strange names or numbers, we do lookups. And so from a security side, that's kind of what, what we're doing. And then during the worship, this person also sort of watches the chat room and the videos and sort of monitors things in the background so that our worship leaders can really focus on the service itself and not be too concerned about if something happens. They know that there are a couple of us in the background that are watching all of that. And then we have where we use the chat room, but also for those people who call in for prayers of the people, then one of those digital greeters will record or make notes for that. Even though we record the service, then we're excuse me, able to take those prayers and submit them for the weekly, our weekly update. So having, I think in your planning, besides the main people who will be doing the service, having a person or two in the background to handle some of the busy stuff that goes on during the service that nobody ever sees. That's what we do to kind of handle all that, make sure we're secure, and let the worship leaders do what they're there to do.
Great. I know for our church, it's really been only the last month that we've been able to kind of, well, it's been a little bit more than a month, but I'd say the last solid month has been the beginning of us even really having kind of what I feel as a full team. Really, our first 2 months, it was really myself and our pastors and our musician. And then probably, I guess it was in April, late April, early May, that we really started bringing in more support, and it's made a significant difference. It's been it began to have that feeling of, you know, we can keep doing this. This is something that's, you know, I hate to keep reusing the word sustainable, but it wasn't feeling sustainable. It felt like, well, at first we also didn't even know how long we'd be doing this. So, you know, I thought maybe it'd be a month, maybe 6 weeks. And then when it was really becoming clear that this was going to be a long-term commitment, then I'll personally just say I began to just desperately want to find team members, folks to be able to share not just the responsibilities of doing the work, but also to just get greater input on, you know, we had created something that worked for us in our team of 4. And I knew that once we could include more eyes and ears, that would also bring some additional gifts when it comes to ideas and different approaches. I would be really curious, before we move on, for those of you that pre-record, and I know that Susan just referenced her experience with pre-recording, but have there been any other tools? Because I'm fortunate, because my experience is so heavily in the live environment, I don't want to gloss over the differences because they're significant. The prep work and the organization of a pre-recorded service has a different level of organization that's required, and it's in fact critical. You can't, the editor can't piece together the final pieces until you have all the different elements. And so I'd be curious to hear just from anyone else who their primary service is all pre-recorded, and how have you gotten into a rhythm of organizing that, the plan, the recording, and the execution of then the editing and then posting? Anyone want to share what it takes to make the secret sauce? That's okay. No pressure.
Andrew, can I
Yeah,
jump in?
absolutely.
This goes well before COVID. It also goes well before the time I was the general presbyter. When I was the head of staff pastor in a church, for
Great.
10 years, we did worship, pre-recorded worship. And experiences that we had there, we chose to have a delayed worship service so that we taped a live service and put together all the elements so that we were always 1 week off in posting. And that was the easiest thing. The other thing that I'll just share that we found helpful was to think about repurposing some of our employees. So our church secretary, we encouraged her to take a PowerPoint class, and she did. And she began to be the person who did our PowerPoint slides for the service, because we didn't need her filing actual paper files in a filing cabinet anymore. And she had excess capacity to be able to take on some of these pieces. So thinking about utilizing staff or other folks in different and new ways was very helpful for us. And the other thing I'll just say is deadlines were critically important. We had a hard stop. The entire service had to be prepared by Tuesday of every week, because we could not get everything that we needed to happen if it was a minute later. So I would reiterate that planning and having a script and having hard deadlines are critical.
Neat. Yeah, it was interesting. I'll just share one story. I recently watched a portion of a service of a church that I will not name, because I'm not saying anything bad, but it's just a very interesting approach that once I saw what they're doing, it stressed me out, because they're doing a live service, but there are large portions of the live service where they are using pre-recorded content. And I was able to finally see that their concerns about it all looking the same are to such an extreme that they have individuals, it's obvious that they have them standing as close as possible in the locations where they'll be during the live, but it's almost feels kind of like Star Trek, because if their positioning is off, when they switch frames from the live to the video, all of a sudden the pastor moves 6 inches. It's like, I don't know, I can't even explain. It's like they've been teleported 1.5 feet to the left, 1.5 feet to the right. And the mindset, I started going through the steps it would take of mapping out where everyone's standing, pre-recording at different times throughout the week, because you can see the lighting's different. You know, some of the songs that you can see that it must be kind of afternoon, the sun's going down on this side. Other elements, it's kind of like a children's sermon. You can see the sun was on a completely different side of the church. It looks wonderful, but I immediately just started stressing and sweating a little, thinking about how much more work, in my opinion, it is to try to manufacture that. Instead of making the choice of just being all recorded or all live, it's one thing to infuse a couple of elements, and I'm about to actually talk about pre-recorded video and audio and working with that, but to really create a 50%, 50-50 service, 50% actual live, 50% pre-recorded. And then if I was the person having to run that, I don't know, maybe if you just do it like anything else, you just get used to it and that's the new norm. But it's a choice. I had not seen that until this past week and went, oh my goodness. But anyhow, so let me, I want to just, before I go into kind of more detail around video and editing, I wanted to say a little bit about working with audio and video, pre-recorded video, or presentation slides in the midst of the service, especially for live. This is very much live focused. But during a service, when you want to play audio or video, one of the first things I'm going to recommend is I strongly recommend that your lead technician who's running everything to play those directly off their computer, and not mess around too much with the ability that some presentation softwares like PowerPoint or other tools allow you to sometimes insert audio or video files into a presentation. I'm all about finding ways to decrease potential risk of complete technical failures. And the reality is that, yes, some of those tools offer these integrations. And the only way I'll put it is just because you can doesn't mean you should. I know with complete confidence, if I have an audio file sitting in the audio player on my desktop, that tool is built to play audio. I know that QuickTime or whatever tool I'm using to play an audio file, that's all it's built to do, and it's going to work. If I have a video queued up in QuickTime as well, or maybe you're on a PC, so it could be Windows Media Player, that tool is built to play a video file. PowerPoint or Keynote or whatever, there's so many different slide tools that you can use for presentations. Over time, they have added these additional features, but that's not their core product. Their core product is presenting words and images like I've created for us today. That's how they started. And then over time, after being pressured to add these extra features, they threw them in there. And yes, they mostly can work. But when you're in the midst of especially a live environment like that, I would rather always choose the option of what I know will absolutely work versus what should work. It is also an issue of quality. When you insert, audio is not as much of an issue, but video, sometimes when inserted into a presentation tool like PowerPoint, I have experienced issues where the quality of what I've inserted is degraded slightly. And then if we're also now dealing with, it's one thing when you're in person and you're projecting that on a screen, but then when you send that through any type of video conferencing system or YouTube Live, it doesn't matter, you're already going to experience a degrading of quality. So why add to the problem? So I don't want to kill that topic, but as you can tell, I'm kind of passionate about it. Another piece is when we're talking about the playing of videos, I've been actually very impressed with how well, in particular, Zoom has been my experience. I'm going to refer to that, but how well it deals with playing videos during that live gathering. They've improved a couple of features that really tightens up so that the audio and video is in sync, and so you're not experiencing delays. It's not, nothing's ever going to be perfect, but it does work pretty well. Now, the one thing I'll say though is that I would not encourage, even though they promote, and these companies will promote saying, oh, you can stream directly from YouTube or Vimeo, and you can share, you can just have that video pulled up in a browser and you can share it directly from your screen. I would strongly discourage you from doing that whenever possible. It goes back to what I kind of just was saying earlier, that if you can have a raw video file that you can download and have on your computer or whatever device you're streaming from to play that file. They are really big on promoting those features. You know, you can share a YouTube video and during your meeting or your gathering. But once again, it's risky. If you are doing a live event and then you're also streaming a video, you're already using up a lot of your bandwidth. If you experience any sort of buffering or delays with that video through, let's say, YouTube, that's just a distraction. And when we're talking about playing maybe a video greeting from a missionary or from a local ministry that you have a relationship with, that you're kind of playing it as a minute for mission, it's already short. You know, often we're talking just a few minutes. And if in a 2-3 minute video, there's multiple delays and stops, you've lost that moment. And so once again, it's just all about kind of risk reward. How do we try to make choices that do whatever we can do to make sure that if we are using any sort of multimedia to share during a live experience, that it's the highest quality possible. And so for this next section, we're going to move into talking about video and lighting and sound. Let me go ahead and make sure I am. All right. So for this next section, I'm going to offer some best practices, like I said, when it comes to your video and audio setup. And the webinar in 2 weeks is going to focus around really the equipment and offering some specific recommendations. So I'm not going to be going into that kind of detail today, but I am going to hit upon just some of the approaches in using or setting up some of that equipment. So video, if you are using a laptop or desktop as your primary streaming or recording device, I'm going to strongly encourage you to use an external camera. An external camera can be mounted on a secure and stable tripod. It can be hooked over actually my camera today is hooked over the top edge of my monitor. There's nothing more distracting than the feeling that your worship leader is rocking around on a boat or is just kind of, you know, every single time any movements or vibrations can so easily be picked up by a camera that if it's built into your iPad or some type of other tablet device that you have, a Surface, it's not your fault. It's just likely that if that's so close to you, the likelihood of tapping it, rocking it, bumping into your desk, it's a high probability situation. Also, internal cameras will end up picking up a lot of vibrations. So, I was talking about before, any sort of book you put down, air conditioner kicking in, you may not even feel it, but the vibrations that hit the floor, that then hit your desk or whatever table you're working at, the lower quality cameras that are built into those types of devices just don't have the ability to deal with those other types of outer forces, shall we say. The higher end cameras have built-in auto stabilization features. They have the ability to handle some of those environmental issues that can come up when filming. But a camera built in or into a device itself, they're just not built for that. They're built for very basic usage. And another element too is that the very basic types of cameras that are built in maybe to the top of your laptop or a tablet don't deal well with the extremes, extreme glare from sunlight or extreme low light conditions. If they experience both at the same time, like you might have a streak of light coming through the window, but maybe the other part of your room that you're in is a little bit darker, it gets confused as to where to focus. And that's where you end up having experiences where, well, you'll see some examples I'm going to give. I pulled together some photos to give some examples later. So that's some of the external cameras is the major focus of that. Something you really want to consider. You know, this is not in any way my attempt to discount those of you that are maybe filming with an iPhone. There's nothing wrong with filming with a phone, but if you're going to film with a particular device like that, get the proper type of tripod for it. There's a lot of adapters now that can hold. It's not new, but it's now there's so many of them that you can attach to a standard tripod with the 1/4-inch thread on top, but it's actually a mounting device for iPads, iPhones, Android devices, any type of device you can think of. But when possible, get a traditional mounting device for it that can be on a stationary device that's separate from anything you're going to be touching during the service. If you're going to be adjusting slides and moving slides, you don't want the camera to be connected to that device you're going to be interacting with a lot, if possible. Once again, you got to work with what you have, and I don't want to in any way have you walk away from today thinking that I'm trying to say that what maybe is your current setup isn't sufficient. That's not it. I just want to offer you kind of a glimpse of what's possible and what are some of the alternate options available. So the next piece I want to talk about is camera positioning. This is really kind of a critical part of thinking through filming. Your camera should really be positioned as close as possible to whoever is speaking. If you're filming in a church, I understand wanting to provide a view of the space during the service. If that's a priority, then you might need to have 2 camera locations that you can switch between during different moments of the service. So if you want to be able to offer the kind of wider perspective of the space during some transitional moments. But when a leader is speaking, whether it's at any moment, you really want to be focused in on that leader as much as possible. And I'm not talking about an extreme close-up, but so that participants can easily see their face as they speak and make that connection. Think about framing the shot as close as you would when a headshot is being taken with a kind of a point and shoot camera. Most web cameras are really only built to provide a high quality picture from a few feet away. And it's not that they can't see further, it's that the quality of the image, it drops significantly after I'd say about 6 to 10 feet. This distance, I'm using an external webcam right now. This is what these types of devices are built for. Even if a webcam or kind of a basic camera does include the ability to zoom, don't use it. They lose quality so quickly. They're really built for the kind of default. Right now, I'm using this web camera. It does have the ability to zoom further if I wanted to, but you would even notice that the quality of the image would deteriorate so dramatically. If you are in a setting, and once again, this will be covered in a few weeks, if zooming is going to be something that's needed, then higher end cameras can allow for that and can zoom from a distance without compromising the quality of the image too much. So let me, oh, that's right. I didn't pull up my other image that I had just to show kind of that little bit closer perspective. So the next element I want to talk about is lighting. No matter how well your camera works in low light conditions, you can still end up with an image with low brightness and deep shadows if the light in your office or sanctuary is too faded. This is where installing additional lighting may come to the rescue. Many churches have some type of theatrical lighting system installed to achieve kind of good illumination in the chancel area, and so that those attending can clearly see what's happening during the service. When these same churches decided to start recording or broadcasting, their services, they found the look of their video just doesn't compare to what is seen when attending in person. And it can kind of throw you off. In some cases, it actually looks really bad. And for those new to video production, this can be very confusing. And often many will assume that their camera equipment is inadequate. While camera quality can be an issue, there's really a good chance that the problem is due to lighting. Camera lenses see things differently than the human eye does. If for some of you, you may already know this, so I apologize, but I think it's important to remember, because I think we all can sometimes forget when we're framing a photo in our phone or with a camera, and we see that what we're looking at that we want to take a picture of looks so great. And then we take that picture or that video and we view it a few hours later and we go, oh, this is terrible. What happened? And then immediately the jokes start of, oh, you don't know how to use your camera. Did you zoom correctly? The reality is that our brains work to interpret what our eyes see in that moment, and they make automatic adjustments. They are the ultimate automatic camera, our eyes. The white balance and exposure. A camera records exactly what it sees, and what you see in the sanctuary with your own eyes and what you see on the screen can be very different. If your sanctuary, I brought up this particular photo just as an example of this was a church that the original lighting that they had in the sanctuary, it was fine for just in-person worship. It was adequate. It was probably the original lighting that was installed when the church was built, possibly, or was updated maybe 30 or 40 years ago. But for filming, that particular lighting, because of the kind of the hue or color of the lights, it's too dark. It's just too dark. Even if you filmed up close, it just would not be adequate, or would create a lot of dark shadows, and it would be hard to see. And as you can see, they upgraded their lighting system, and it makes it a much more vibrant and bright space. And so one of the things also I want to mention about lighting is about just the implications of stained glass windows or large glass windows behind the chancel area. If your church faces east in the morning and sun shines through stained glass windows behind the chancel area, proper lighting is actually going to be even more critical, because without it, you'll really have difficulty in capturing your worship leaders' faces, because the camera will overestimate how bright the area is, and often will kind of go bonkers. It just won't have the ability to kind of really separate. And so that's where kind of more professional lighting from the front can counter the light that's coming from behind and kind of balance it out. So the main thing that I really wanted to focus on is just really making sure that before you kind of too heavily focus on the equipment, that you really get an assessment of the lighting in your space. It's going to, especially for larger spaces, it's really going to require some professional assistance. And then there are some options. Here's some tips I just want to offer, that if your setup is in your office or another type of smaller space, when at all possible, select a space for filming that offers some natural light. Now, you want that light facing you and not at your back. You can position lights or lamps so that they are facing the main subject of recording, or yourself, from at least kind of two angles, to your left, to your right. And I think I have a photo here that kind of gives the example of what can happen when the lighting is just kind of behind you. But you want to set up any sort of additional light sources, angle those towards you, forming kind of a triangle. And so with you, the subject being the third point of the triangle, this really helps minimize shadows being cast across the face. You know, traditional household lamps can work a little, but they're not really built for this. But they can work. I mean, you can kind of play with them and adjust the direction of the lamps. I always recommend kind of not just an open light bulb, because that's just too much direct light. So you want to keep the shades on them and kind of play with them, play around with them a little. I mean, I know some folks that have done some amazing things using 2 or 3 different household lamps, you know, kind of one to the left, one to the right, another one kind of higher above, to kind of create kind of a warm and balanced lighting. I was going to stay away from talking about equipment, but I do want to offer one basic example of a lighting gadget that that is available called a ring light. And this is, it's really, there's a couple of different lighting choices that could work, but pretty much it's a device that, this is, I'm messing around with my slides here a little too much. Here we go. This is a device that fits around your camera, whether you're using a higher end camera like this or even just a basic webcam. But what it does is, as you can tell, it provides an equal and balanced kind of illumination directly around your camera. And there is a version of it. There's some basic versions that are available for as little as $15, $20. But what the style that I would recommend are the ones that come with a dimmer. There are going to be times where different spaces you're in are going to require a fuller, brighter light. And then other times of day, if you do have some natural sun coming in, if you were to have one that doesn't have a dimmer, it can be too much. And that's where you get the effect of kind of looking, well, if you've got a head like mine, you look like an angel with a halo. But it also, if you wear glasses, you don't want the brightness up too high, or that creates a significant reflection in your glasses. But the styles that have this dimmer feature built into it, actually you can find for as little as $50. And it's a simple tool. A lot of, if you've watched news recently or any of the morning shows that are currently being filmed from reporters' basements, many of them are using this style of light. And it's a simple way to kind of really improve the quality of, maybe you're using a basic camera. I know folks that film using these ring lights that they're filming with their cell phone, with their iPhone or another type of device, an iPad, and it's in the middle of one of these ring lights, and the lighting makes the difference. You know, audio, bad video is much more forgiving than bad audio. And I'm going to make a bold statement that I really strongly believe that the audio for a live stream is more important than the video. Audio is not an area where you want to cut any corners. If your audio quality is so-so, I'll probably stick around. But if your audio is terrible, I don't care how good the video is, I'm leaving. I mean, that's just a reality. I think we've all experienced that when we've been part of any type of presentation that we've joined, and you can hang in there for a good long while if you can hear clearly. But when you can't see, it's just, it's one of those things that you can get past that, even if it's just kind of like, you know, that animated look. As long as you can hear, it's really okay. So this next piece of talking about audio is going to sound similar to the video, because it's about using external microphones whenever possible. This is very similar when it comes to the issues that can come up with the microphones built into cell phones or tablets or computers. You want to be able to pull, if you can't pull sound directly from a soundboard, you know, if you're filming in a sanctuary space, then you're really going to require a good external microphone. No matter what type of device you're using to film, you know, just whenever possible, I try to not use the built-in microphone. Issues with internal mics are similar to what I raised raised before. They don't deal well with ambient noises. You can find external microphones for most cell phones, and a wide array of external microphones for your tablets, your laptops, your desktop computers. Most will even come with some type of microphone stand, which you should absolutely use. There are wireless Bluetooth and USB microphones. I will almost always recommend a wired connection over wireless. There are particular styles of microphones that are wireless that are high-end and work perfectly. But for a lot of these kind of what I'd call over-the-counter microphones, you're going to want to use wired connections. It's always going to be safer. It's similar to the conversation that a wired Ethernet connection will give you a faster and more stable internet connection than Wi-Fi. That's same type of thought when it comes to audio. A wired connection is going to give you a consistent and high quality sound. So just a few final thoughts, and then I want to just give the last few moments to any questions you might have. But the main highlights I really want to offer, let me actually close the slides here. So the main elements that I just kind of want to kind of remind you all of is just communicating a good online, whatever your plan is, communicate it clearly. Send out extra email reminders, create and post events on Facebook, use your phone tree to call members who aren't on email or social media. This is part of the production process. So there's the preparing of the service, there's the arranging of the elements, the leaders. There's also having a good promotional plan for digital worship, and that can't be forgotten. It can't be left out. Focus your energy and efforts. If you traditionally have had multiple services, one of the things that I really recommend is just hold one for the time being. I know that is painful to some because they've had, especially for churches, larger churches that have had separate services that have their own personalities, and have drawn different families who have had different tastes in their worship experience. But for now, I just really recommend holding one and really focusing all your energy and efforts around that one opportunity to gather. Record the service for those who may not be able to participate in the live version. I know we've talked about that before, but I know of some that have said, we're just going to have it be live. We don't want to deal with having to edit. You don't have to edit. Just be okay with sharing whatever happened in that live experience with those that maybe just couldn't make it for the live. I think it's one of those, it's a growing edge for the perfectionists out there. But yes, there may have been some blunders, mistakes that happened during the live. Don't obsess around editing those out or fixing those. Just share what happened. Share that time of worship for those that may not be able to gather at that time, but later. This is a big one. Educate yourself on copyright rules. This is part of the production and planning. So early in the week, you've decided what's going to be part of the service. That also is that moment that needs to initiate making sure you have proper permissions for any content that you're planning on using. There are a number of things you can do in a traditional in-person service, like read a poem, sing a hymn, have the choir perform an anthem. Some of those fall within fair use if the fair use of your current licenses, but there is also a number of things that really do require a separate set of permissions for what would be defined, I guess, as performance rights for online or for recording for release live or podcasting. You might actually already have some of that in place, but just make sure you do the research. When you begin to record or live stream a service, those rules do change. Take the time to learn the limits of the technology you're using. As we've already discussed, getting good sound can be complicated. Using the built-in microphone on your phone, tablet, or webcam can pick up all sorts of potential noises or distractions. So whether you're recording live recording or going live from your sanctuary or dining room table, and you can't pull sound directly from a kind of traditional soundboard, use some type of external microphone. This can be as simple as using a headset like this. It can be the earbuds that came with your particular device. Those can often provide a really higher quality audio. When testing your live stream setup, be sure to use the types of devices your members will be using to get a sense of what you have to, let me rephrase this. When you're testing your live stream out, be sure that when you're wanting to get a sense of what the participants are going to experience, use the same types of devices you know that they're going to be using to view it on. And so if you have a 27-inch monitor like I do in front of me, which is unusual, this is not normal, when you're doing a test run, you should really view what that content's going to look like on a smaller iPad, or shrink down the size of your browser to what's a normal browser size. And so you just really want to kind of have a sense, if you're testing audio, if you're currently working on a system that has, $100, $200 speakers or hooked into your stereo, that's not normal. Most people are going to be listening to the service through the speakers coming out of their TV or their tablet. And so make sure that when you're doing tech checks, that you're actually checking and basing it upon the technology that your average participant's going to be using. At some point while working on your plan and you ever have to cut expenses, and just don't cut corners on audio. I feel like I'm broken record here, audio, but it's really important that you really maintain the highest quality audio possible. And finally, I want to offer words of encouragement to learn from your church family. There is no need. That's part of why we are here today, last week, this week, next week. But there is no need to be attempting to reinvent the wheel or to learn all of this from scratch. Each of you has been working on this for a few months now, or maybe you're just getting started, but you've all learned so much. What I really would recommend is identify churches in the presbytery that have come up with a similar approach as to what either you already are doing or are planning on beginning to do, and begin to compare notes. Find, and I say that very purposely, to find folks that have chosen a similar path. In the first 2 months or so, the pastor at First Pres Elizabethtown, Chelsea, and I, we had never met before, but we found each other through the Presbytery Facebook group that John had created for folks kind of how are we responding to COVID. And we just started kind of supporting each other. To this day, I've still never met her in person. Someday I can't wait to, but I've met her husband, I've met her kid. We've talked about sound and we've talked about slides, and we began kind of sharing kind of tips and tricks and even contacting each other on Saturdays when we just couldn't figure something out. We do not have to go this journey alone. And it's complicated, and we don't need to make it more complicated by trying to learn everything. We can learn from each other. And I think that's one of the greatest gifts we have as being this community of Presbyterians. And so I wanted to end on that note. And it's kind of a reoccurring theme, because I couldn't have gotten to where I am without the community. And so I encourage you to draw from each other. Does anyone have any kind of questions? I know that last section, I hit a lot of different things. And like John said, if you do have, some follow-up questions, you're, more than welcome to forward them on, because that may not come out right now. But if anyone did have a question, Marissa, please go ahead.
This is sort of a techie question, but at least, I know that it's Ethernet would be preferable to Wi-Fi, and right now I am connected. This is my second floor, and I'm connected through Wi-Fi. On Sunday, we had a nightmare in Zoom because people couldn't hear me, and I was the person that was going to preach. So I've been thinking about the possibility of making the connection better. But I do have a cable connection here, but I need to know what equipment I need in order to be able to go to connect the computer through Ethernet, because right now I don't know what to get, and I've been
Okay.
trying to look at everything, but I don't know what to get to do that. And it should, I think it should, even though our router and modem are downstairs. That's the other thing that I need to say.
Yeah. Well, and that's so just the short version of that is the router, the physical device that comes from the cable company is the key to success. That's where the back of most of those devices has at the least, sometimes there's only one port, but most of them have up to 5. And that's the device that you're really needing to plug in directly. Some cable companies offer that main device, and then they've placed a couple of, actually I've got one right here in my mother-in-law's office. You know, there's the main device, and then they install these additional external devices to repeat the Wi-Fi signal through the house. But you don't want to, and they'll often have a spot on the back to plug in an Ethernet cable. But that's actually not the source of the highest speed connection. The highest speed connection is connecting directly to that cable box that came from the company. And you can safely, without losing too much speed, up to about, I'd say 30 feet is the most I would ever recommend running off of the box. It's not attractive. It's a big wire running through your house, but it doesn't have to stay there all week. You can just pull it out for those moments that you need to use it. But it is something I would highly encourage for all. It's you mentioned that your audio dropped out. That's kind of a signal. You know, a lot of these systems like Zoom, as they begin to see a deterioration in signal, what they'll do, usually what they do is try to save the audio, and you may have all experienced where it'll say, you know, your video has been disabled due to a poor connection. They're built to almost always put all the resources towards keeping the audio safe. So it was interesting. I think you said that the opposite happened, that your audio had gone out. So I don't know what.
Yeah.
But that's part of that roller coaster of a Wi-Fi connection, and it doesn't really matter if you have the best package that whatever company you use offers. In the end, you can have high blazing fast speed coming to the house, but there are other things that can cause the Wi-Fi signal to be impacted. So I'll just.
And I do have a little box upstairs, another one, but I didn't see anything that could connect directly to the Ethernet. Yeah.
Can I chime in here, Andrew, if possible?
Please, Carter.
Wonderful. Marissa, so for your router that's downstairs, have you possibly talked to your internet service provider about doing what's called an Ethernet run, or running an Ethernet cable from that to the office where you're sitting now? Because the actual maximum distance for Ethernet cabling, whether it's category 5, 5E, or 6, is 100 meters or 300 feet. So if you're within that distance, having an Ethernet run from the router to your office would probably give you the results you're looking for on that computer. Even if, like Andrew said, you have something that's not really looking too great, that is just draped on the floor. I mean, I personally don't like the idea of a tripping hazard, but you're trying to get the fastest connection you can possible. And for the internet speed you probably have coming into your building, you probably don't need anything more sophisticated than a category 5E cable that runs from the router to the office where you're sitting now. Category 5 and 5E can support 100 megabits per second, and category 6 can support 1 gigabit. So, and you probably have your speed coming into your building is probably lower than 100 megabit per second. And having that one run up to your office will probably give you exactly what you're looking for. I'd be more than happy to consult with you offline on that as well.
I know where to get you.
We have a
That'd be good.
networking consultant. There we go.
I wanted to ask a question.
Sure, please.
The various devices that you showed, like the circle light and the various microphones there, what kind of store do you go to buy that kind of thing?
So if you're, in person, I mean, you can find many of those at your local Best Buy. They'll have a wide variety of them available, even some of the lighting options as well. I would recommend, honestly, just going on to Amazon, because you can sort and they'll show the kind of, not that I'm a fan of always trusting what are the most popular items currently being sold on Amazon, but it's a good starting place. You can go into and dive into that category of lighting, and you can sort it so that it shows like what are the top 10 or 50 or 100 devices that have sold recently, and that can be a good starting place to kind of see which of the companies are the ones to look at. There's so many companies now that offer these. But it's a good place to begin your research.
Okay, thank you.
Andrew?
Yeah.
My name's Michael. I'm a technical guy at my church, and I wanted to let you know about bnh.com if you didn't know about them. They have consultants in which you can, talk to them online and whatnot, and it's where my production company bought all of our equipment from for a lot of smaller gigs.
Oh, okay, great.
They are focused on video and audio specifically, although they do hold a lot of other inventory.
Neat. That's great.
What was the name again?
bnh.com.
Well, if there are not any other, oh, wait a minute, Sherry, please go ahead.
When you talked about having a professional check out your lighting, how do you go about finding someone to do that?
That is a great question.
Can I answer?
John, please.
So one of the components of the webinars that we intended to have is we have contracted with Worship Times to do our first 3 webinars. So look for Andrew and friends next week. But the week after that, we have contracted with Video Solutions, Mike Little, and they're a local Louisville company that works with churches and others on videography and sells equipment and other things. The Presbytery, as part of our grant program, digital worship grant program, is going to provide all of our churches that participate in this a one-on-one or a in-person or online consultation with your congregation and Mike, where he can hear your questions and see your situation and potentially walk your physical site and offer his own suggestions when you tell him what type of platforms you're looking at and what you're hoping to do. You could purchase the equipment through him or not. That's totally not part of it, but we are providing that service to the churches, hopefully as an added bonus. And then at the very end of the process, of course, we've talked about the Presbytery will be providing, look like it could be between $1,000 and $2,000. I've talked with the finance committee and they're willing to be as generous as we need to be to help our churches get where they need to go for you to purchase what you need. So I'm not encouraging anyone to hold off, but you might want to and see how things work out with scheduling appointments with Mike. And if that doesn't work for you, then by all means, all these other resources are fantastic. But that's what we have tried to plan for you to be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I should be clear, you'll notice that I did not go into any detail on lighting for sanctuary, fellowship halls, because that is a world unto itself. And really, I love all the DIY property folks out there in churches, but this is an area you do not I do not recommend trying to do it yourself unless you have somebody who is a technical theater professional who maybe works at Actors Theater or Center for the Arts. That is an area you don't want to mess around. It can be an expensive investment, but when done well, can really be an asset for a church, not just when it comes to thinking through digital lighting for filming and stuff, but also when it comes to energy conservation. There's some options out there that really can save you money. But it's not something I even wanted to touch because there's so many different approaches. So I really was focusing on kind of your office or individual studio kind of setup. But I'm excited to hear of the offerings, the connection that John's made for 2 weeks from now, because I know our church will be paying attention as well. Well, thank you all so very much, and really look forward to being with you again, and we'll see you again next week.